So first we're going to be talking about the ALS, which stands for anterior lateral system, and it contains 3 nerve endings. As we can see here, there is one section here, one here, and one here, and it goes in this order. This is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So basically, the spinothalamic tract, also known as the anterolateral system, is a sensory pathway from the skin to the thalamus out, and is being picked up by receptors into the body, and specifically into the spinal cord, and then it's traveling up the spinal cord until it reaches like around the midbrain, where it will enter in either the ventral posterolateral nucleus or the ventral posteromedial nucleus, where then it will come out towards the basal ganglia. The sensory information that is transmitted through the ALS is described as like an affective sensation, which basically means that like it gives you a compulsion to act amongst something. So if you have like an itch that you want to scratch, this will come through, this will be the itch. It will be going into your mind, and then it will like come back out as you responding and scratching yourself. The same way if you are in pain, you're responding to the pain like by putting your hand on like a hot fire top, you will move your hand away very quickly because of the ALS. This is also called crude touch, that does stuff with pain and temperature. So the pathways cross over in the level of the spinal cord rather than in the actual brain itself. So the second one that we have is the DCML, which its full name is dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. And it basically is a sensory pathway of the central nervous system that deals with sensations of fine touch, vibration, 2-point discrimination, and position from the skin and the joints. And it basically transmits information from the body using these neurons here. And it goes into the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe in the brain. And then these pathways receive information from receptors throughout the body. So there are 3 different types of neurons that are involved in the pathway: first order, second order, and third order. And the first ones are sensory neurons in the dorsal root ganglia, and the second neurons send their axons to the thalamus, and then the third neurons are in the ventral nuclear group and send these to the postcentral gyrus. So the DCML starts at 4 nerve endings: the Meissner corpuscles, the Pacinian corpuscles, the Ruffini endings, and the Merkel endings. So if we see here, this is where the dorsal root ganglion is. So we can tell that these are the first order neurons. And there's also one here. So these are the upper and lower ones, and they're coming up right to about where the medulla is. This is also where the dorsal column is, and the gracile nucleus is, and the cuneate nucleus. And then it's going up towards the pons and the cerebellum and past the midbrain and into the VPL. And these are the second order neurons that are sending it to the thalamus. So we're going into the medial lemniscus right here, which is this. So once it arrives in the VPL, it's being transmitted into the thalamus and the ventroposterior nucleus. And then the third order neurons, which are inside of the cerebral cortex, in the ventral nuclear group, they come in here into the cortex and then into the postcentral gyrus, which is in the somatosensory cortex. So the medial lemniscus is basically the axons of the second order neurons that are crossing over or decussing in the medulla, and then it forms this. In more detail, when an action potential is made in the tissue, the action potential will then begin to travel along the first order neurons. And then in the brainstem here, where we get the second order neurons, the axons cross over to the side and form the medial lemniscus. And at the medulla, the axons then travel up the rest of the brainstem and synapse at the thalamus, which is the ventral posterolateral nucleus, which is the VPL, for sensation that involves the neck and the bottom, and for sensation from the head. So then in the third order neurons, the ventral posterior nucleus in the thalamus ascends the posterior limb of the internal capsule, and these come from inside of the head itself, and the axons actually synapse in the primary somatosensory cortex, which is this area here, with lower body sensation and upper body more lateral, with the lower body medial. Lastly, we're going to be talking about the corticospinal tract. The main function of it is voluntary motor control of the body and the limbs. And because of some of the connections across the midline, which is here, each side of the brain is responsible for controlling muscles for the limbs on opposite sides of the body, while controlling lower down muscles on the same side of the body. So as you can see, there is only 2 sections in the corticospinal tract, and the second one is here where the lower motor neutrons are, and this is the receptor, the signals getting transmitted from the limbs and the muscles that are axial, and it comes in and it meets with the anterior right commissure, and it comes up here and goes into the axial. This is called the internal capsule. It's where they cross over each other and also form the upper motor neurons that are right here. And both of these are heading towards the same direction in the precentral gyrus. And this one is to do with controlling limbs. This is to do with controlling like muscles lower down. And then the decussation of the pyramids is basically a crossing over of the anterior part of the lower medulla oblongata, in which most of the fibers of each of the pyramids intersect as they cross the midline and then go down into the lateral corticospinal tracts. So this is what we see happening here.
So today I will be talking about the different types of regions that are very important in the spinal cord. And so I will first start off with the sacral region of the spinal cord, in which I am labeling the brain from posterior to anterior. And so something that I hope that you keep in mind would be that there are different 3 parts that have already been previously mentioned, but is the DCML, ALS, and CS, in which I will show a very bad drawing, but an accurate representation of what the sacral region of the spinal cord looks like. And so as you can see, I am labeling it. And a key fact from this is that there's so much white matter because it is stained from it. It's actually not black matter. And so, yeah, I'm just like labeling right now, and I'm getting like the specific grooves and basically where the decussations have lied. And so every single part of the spinal cord is so important because anything could be damaged and it could forever like lose your ability to do so many things. So now I will be talking about the lumbar region, in which, again, very badly drawn, but I hope you get the message. The lumbar region of the spinal cord, in which it is containing the DH and the LH. And so there's also a very important called the gracile vesiculus, in which it's the groove that is outside of the lumbar region. And so now we are going to identify the thoracic region of the spinal cord, in which the thoracic region is actually quite big. And the reason why there's more white matter is because there's more information being sent out, where the gray matter is responsible for the voluntary movement. And so something that's really important is that we need to know where specifically ALS is, where CST is, where UH is, where DH is, and basically like everything that's going on right now. And so now we reach the cervical region of the spinal cord, in which we have to understand where the dorsum column is, the gracile column is, and the cuneigal column is. And we have to also understand where LH is located, where DH is located, where AIS is located, and that any damage can cause anything. And so overall, the cervical region has been able to have many grooves inside of it, and it is by far the widest part of the spinal cord. And so overall, this is like basically the drawing of the cervical region that I did. So in conclusion, there are the different parts of the spinal cord that are so tremendously important, and each part is so significant that if you damage one of them, you could have a fatal loss for the rest of your entire life. And so the sacral region would be in which you would lose control of the hips. The lumbar region would be that you would also have to lose control of your hips and your legs, but you would have the ability to not be able to walk again. And the thoracic region, dependent on where, contains like the muscles, the chest, the rib cage, the back muscles, while the cervical region is very damaging and is actually could cause death, because it would be very close to your brain, first of all, and you could lose partial sensory loss.